Hello, folks. Is my microphone live? Oh, marvelous. Excellent. Oh, can I quickly take your picture, do you think? I am so happy and excited to be here and so nervous, and this little ritual really helps me. So you can just say hello, wave hi. Oh, marvelous. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, it is amazingly great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Please get settled in and just give me a few minutes because I've got something kind of personal that I would like to talk to you about. All of my life, I've loved to ponder the great mysteries of the universe, the bizarre paradoxes of quantum entanglement, the origin and nature of human consciousness, and why people either absolutely, passionately love or completely loathe and hate licorice. And Marmite for Adam. But to me, the greatest, most fascinating mysteries of all are those complex conundrums that have fascinated poets and songwriters down the years, since time immemorial. The myriad possibilities of human sexuality and the human urge towards romance, intimacy, and love. Speaking of love, I love games of all kinds. I've been obsessed with arcade games since the age of 5. I made board games, computer games, and paper RPGs all throughout my childhood and teens, and I became a professional game designer at the age of 22. I've dedicated my adult life to making and studying games, to understand what they are, and see what they could become. But there's something that's always bothered me about games as a cultural form, since before I became a game designer even. The private lives of other human beings are seemingly fascinating to us. Maybe I'm just particularly nosy, but I think you'll agree that the love lives and sex lives of our friends and acquaintances, and even of people that we don't know, are a source of endless interest to almost everyone. Tabloid magazines and celebrity gossip websites are a testament to this fact. But more seriously, the way that pretty much every cultural form in the world has treated the topics of love, sex, and romance show us how endlessly fascinated we are by what we do in private, between the sheets, and between our hearts. Countless pop songs have been written about love, romance, and sex. Darn, for a few decades there, that was pretty much all that pop songs were about. And the same goes for poetry, novels, plays, and movies. From bodice rippers to rom-coms, creators all around the world reflect on the business of getting in each other's business. So where are the great video games about love and romance, about sex and intimacy? Where are our Romeo and Juliets, our Anna Kareninas, our Bridget Jones diaries? My name is Richard Lemarchand, and I'm a game designer who is interested in love, romance, sexuality, empathy, sympathy, and all of the myriad connections and disconnections that link human beings together and sometimes tear us apart. I got my start in the game industry in the early 90s at the British wing of the American game studio Microprose before moving to California in the mid-90s to work at Crystal Dynamics, where I helped to create game series like Gex, Pandemonium, and the Soul Reaver series. In 2004, I moved to Naughty Dog, where I worked on a couple of Jak and Daxter games before becoming the lead or the co-lead game designer on all 3 PlayStation 3 games in the Uncharted series. Oh. You guys, gosh, thank you. At the very start of Uncharted 4, I did a tiny bit of work on the project, but I am super excited right now because Uncharted 4 will be the first Naughty Dog Uncharted game that I can play as a fan instead of as a developer who knows every little corner of the game. I had to come away to Europe just after this was released, so I haven't played it yet. No spoilers, please, for the rest of the conference. I hope you guys have already been enjoying this game as much as I know that I'm going to when I get back home to Los Angeles. In 2012, I started work alongside Professor Tracy Fullerton as a full-time professor in the USC Games program as part of the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts, where I now teach game design, development, and production to the next generation of game developers. I've also begun work on a series of experimental games as part of the USC Game Innovation Lab. And I'm very honored to say that my game, The Meadow, which I co-created with MFA candidate Marzi Campos, and which was developed by a team of very talented student volunteers, was selected as a finalist in this year's Indiecade competition. The Meadow's a weird virtual reality art installation game, and if any of you guys come to the DIGRA FDG conference at Abertay University this August, maybe you'll get the chance to play it there. I'm very excited to be creating experimental, artistic, independent virtual reality games right here at the beginning of what I believe is going to be a revolution in virtual world building. So let's chat about this later. I'm incredibly excited about all of the experimental work that you guys are doing here. Oh, by the way, do you like this painting that I found of a historical scene in Visby? Do you guys know this amazing painting? I really want to play a video game based on this painting. It looks to me like Dark Souls concept art or something. So much storytelling going on here. And it is a real pleasure to be here in Visby at the Gotland Game Conference. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me. The talks have been amazing, and the games that I've played here have been of incredibly high quality. You guys are really showing off your skills. I know you're all destined for amazing things, whatever kinds of games that you choose to make. It's been really great seeing your work. For thousands of years of human culture, we've lived with social taboos. Things that we're not allowed to do, or sometimes even talk about, because of a moral judgment in our community, or perhaps because of our community's religious beliefs. Human beings throughout history have been told that we must cover our bodies in certain ways. We must not talk about certain of our feelings or urges. We must not kiss someone of the same gender as us. We must not have a gender other than the one assigned to us at birth. More often than not, rather than playing a helpful role in establishing shared ethical values in society, taboos around human sexuality have been damaging or harmful, preventing vulnerable people from seeking help in cases of, say, teenage pregnancy or sexually transmitted infection, or preventing people from living happy and fulfilled lives in a way that expresses their sexuality or gender identity. Taboos that come with gender roles can be very harmful. We're coming to understand through scientific study and the widespread taboo that in order to be properly masculine, men should not talk about their feelings of sadness or despair, that leads to very high incidences of depression and self-harm among men. The repercussions for violating taboo can be very serious. We might be made fun of or rejected from our social group, or we might become a victim of violence. Taboo is interesting to me, perhaps because I grew up in a culture where lots and lots of things were taboo. And over the course of my life, I watched a lot of those taboos either fall away or sometimes change shape. I came up with the British pop culture of the 70s and 80s, where Monty Python, the Young Ones, and pop stars from Bowie to Madonna, Prince and beyond were busy saying the unsayable, doing the undoable, and in doing so were helping to dismantle the old ways of thinking that were sexist, racist, or homophobic, and opening us up to new appreciations of human life. My understanding that a work of art, a work of pop art perhaps, like a comedy film or a pop song, could have an enormously positive social impact and could change the way that millions of people think, left an indelible mark on me, and has informed my thinking about games over the course of the time that I've been making them. Because as artists, the fundamental things that we game designers trade in are emotion and ideas. The characters and situations that we depict and give life to using game mechanics touch people's hearts and give us things to think about. Games might just amuse us or make us laugh or provide us with some entertaining distraction, and that's great. We need games to amuse and distract us. But just like a great love song or a great novel, games can activate our deepest feelings to make us sympathize or empathize with the characters in the game and, by extension, with other people in the world. Because they're games, their interactivity, their magic ludic powers, they have the opportunity, I think, to do special things that we're only just beginning to figure out how to talk about. Art lets us discuss what we couldn't otherwise discuss. It lets us see and understand things that we couldn't otherwise see. Research at the University of Toronto in 2007 showed that just as people's skills as pilots improve when they spend time in a flight simulator, so people's ability to model the emotional states of other people improves when they spend time reading fiction. Reading fiction improves that reader's capacity to understand what the real human beings in their lives are thinking and feeling, it turns out. So, back to my question. Where are all the great games about love, romance, and sex? Well, of course, the truth is that there have been very many games featuring love, romance, and sex throughout history. And you can read about the early part of that history in Brenda Romero's great book, Sex in Video Games. Countless games have had a narrative jumping off point about rescuing a girlfriend or avenging your murdered wife. But those games usually treat love and sex in the most shallow way possible, either failing to look at them deeply in the narrative, or, more interesting and uniquely for us as game designers, failing to incorporate those ideas into play mechanics. Today, I'm going to skip past some of the better-known and more recent games that have worked well with love, romance, and sex. Games like the Mass Effect and Dragon Age series from BioWare, which have done amazing things in creating playable spaces of romantic possibility into the character arcs of their protagonists. And the Sims series, which really, of course, brought interpersonal relationships to the fore for computer games. Instead, I want to take you on a quick tour of some of my favorite titles in the recent history of games about our private lives. All the way back in 2006, a revolution in game design quietly began with news of the creation of Lapis by game designer, media artist, and educator Heather Kelly. This Nintendo DS game was ostensibly about petting a rabbit with the stylus. But in fact, the gestures of the game and the responses of this little bunny were designed to teach women about self-pleasure. The game was very controversial and was never released beyond festivals and competitions. But its subject matter and mechanics clearly signaled new directions for game designers all around the world. Ever the early adopters and progressive explorers, the Copenhagen Game Collective released Darkroom Sex Game in 2008. This is an award-winning multiplayer erotic rhythm game without any visuals, where the player uses a Wiimote to work with his or her partner to find a mutual rhythm that eventually leads to, shall we say, mutual happiness. This game was truly groundbreaking, and it focuses in a really delightful way on the player's embarrassment and their sense of humor as they play together in this intimate, personal way. The BAFTA-winning indie video game developer Size 5 Games made a game called Privates in 2010, which was commissioned by Channel 4 Games. In this game, you have to defend a urethra against invading STI germs. The game was placed as a kind of cheeky, naughty entertainment game, and it was a fun game to play. But of course, it had the stealthy goal of educating young people about sexual health. It attracted also a lot of controversy in the conservative British press at the time, which probably helped it achieve its goal of popularity with its teenage audience that it was trying to reach. A lot of games made using the hyperlinked fiction game engine Twine have tackled loads of great subject matter related to love, romance, and sex. The game designer Porpentine has made a series of amazing games featuring explicit content and very complex emotion, including this game, Cyber Queen, her 2012 tribute to the science fiction game trope of the murderous woman AI. And Kara Ellison's 2013 Twine game, Sacrilege, manages to package up a complex bundle of ideas about sex and romance as seen through the eyes of a woman at a nightclub. Straightforwardly, it's a game about someone trying to get their sexual needs met on a night out with friends, and all of the emotional complication that results, which is a very rare subject for a computer game. This game affected me a lot. It's about the human struggle to communicate, to get what we want and what we need, and it does so with Kara's characteristic wit and heart. By the way, if you want to read a lot more about digital games that address these topics of love, sex, and romance, Kara Ellison has been writing about them for quite some time in her column S.exe for the online games magazine Rock, Paper, Shotgun. She also has written quite a lot about this subject matter in her book Embed With. Definitely check out Kara's work. It's really amazing. In 2013, the game artists Tale of Tales made a sensuous game called Luxuria Superbia, a game about, and I quote, touch, pleasure, and joy made for fingers on touch screens and joysticks on computers. The game seems quite innocent at first, perhaps like a colorful action game, but the theme of gliding through a tunnel and pulsing towards ever greater peaks of aesthetic experience is a nice metaphor for something or other. It's a little bit like a cross between Lapis and one of my favorite games, Rez. One of my favorite game designers working in this area right now is Nina Freeman, whose 2014 game, How Do You Do It, was made in collaboration with Emmett Butler, John Kitaka, and Deckman Cross. The game's about an 11-year-old girl playing with her disrobed dolls in a way that many of us will recognize from our own childhoods. She's playing with these dolls and trying to make sense of what she's overheard about adult intimacy. The game handles its subject matter with an incredibly delicate touch, I think, and it hits a really tasteful and nuanced tonal note in relation to its delicate, even taboo subject matter. If you have any doubts that a relatively innocent subject like this is taboo, then you should read what Nina wrote in conversation with Kara Ellison about some of the horrible, horrible comments that this game got online from people who were outraged by it, outraged that someone had made a game like this. Nina has a background as a poet, which I think is interesting. And a few months ago, she released her latest game, Sibel, which is about her formative teenage sexual and romantic experiences in and around an MMO. Sibel's a really interesting game. It combines action gameplay, text adventure, and live-action video. And I strongly recommend that you check it out. You can find it on Steam. In a quite different part of the game spectrum, from the narrative likes of Sibel, is this game. I'm sure some of you guys have seen this. Realistic Kissing Simulator by Jimmy Andrews and Lauren Schmidt. 2 players use joysticks to control these waggly tongues. The game is funny and silly and playful, and you'll notice that it doesn't gender the 2 characters. So it has a point of view that's very inclusive of absolutely everyone's experience. I love this game. It's so, so good. This is my friend Naomi Clark. She's an amazing game designer, creative director, and educator, known for titles like Sissy Fight 2000, Mismanagement, and GameStar Mechanic. She's currently working on a new game about a human woman and an alien woman making out. And the game's called Consentical. It's a card game for 2 people. Turn by turn, the players use their cards to initiate actions that lead to pleasure, either for themselves, for their partner, or for the shared enjoyment of both partners. At the end of the game, the players are asked to reflect on the game's outcome and discuss it. And as well as being a fun game with really good, deep, rich mechanics, Naomi's an amazing game designer, it's a great way of creating a space of conversation around this tension between giving and selfishness in sex, and around verbally negotiating boundaries and consent. Someone else interested in these ideas is Robert Yang, who's an artist, game designer, academic, and writer, who helped kickstart the art game movement with his Radiator series of Half-Life mods. Over the course of the past few years, he's made an amazing series of games that use game mechanics in a really artful way to look at issues around intimacy. In 2014, he made a game about spanking sex play called Hurt Me Plenty. The game takes place in 3 phases. The first has you negotiate the boundaries of the encounter with a handshake, whereby you set the intensity and agree on the clothing that will be worn, and choose a safe word. The poster on the wall of the room that you can barely see there says, "All power exchange has to be negotiated." The second phase has you play by just going to town on your submissive's bottom with your hand, which glows redder the harder you spank it. You can just see it's a little pink there. However, you have to be careful not to cross the boundaries you've agreed on. If you do, then the encounter ends and you are locked out of the game for some number of days. You can't play it anymore until it times out. And this is what Robert refers to as a cooling off period in your relationship, in which the computer AI exerts its rights not to have to deal with you for a little while. The third and final step of the game is aftercare, where the AI unpacks his feelings about the session, and you, the player, get a chance to think about the encounter too. It's a really amazing game. It raises lots of questions about consent and about the explicit verbal negotiation of interpersonal boundaries, which I think are subjects that we should talk about more than we do. We're trained by many elements in culture to believe that verbally negotiating what we want around sex is taboo, that it's awkward, embarrassing, or unromantic to clearly ask for things and to say what we do and don't want. Of course, consent is absolutely essential in every single sexual encounter. Getting better at talking about consent is something that a game like Hurt Me Plenty can help us to do, and can maybe even make consent sexy and romantic instead of awkward or embarrassing. Another of Robert's games, Cobra Club, is a visually very explicit game. Definitely not safe for work, I warn you. It's a game about sending nude pictures of yourself through the internet. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but the game isn't just about the relatively new social phenomena of sexting, which would be worthy enough of exploration by a game in and of itself. But it's also about online privacy and the way that we trust people and companies online. Robert's really been on a tear recently. He's made several other games about sex and the body, including Rinse and Repeat, Stick Shift, and Succulent. Robert's approach with these games is playful and irreverent. They're very funny games, but they're also intended to land with serious artistic intent. One note of warning via Robert Yang for anyone thinking about making games that feature explicit sexual content. It can be very difficult to distribute this kind of game in a way that earns you money. At the GDC Microtalks this year, which is a session of short talks that I curate at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, Robert spoke about the challenges he faces in distributing his games. The guidelines and laws around getting paid for adult content in the various online marketplaces that we have available to us as game makers are often confusing or inconsistent. And Robert has not yet found a way to charge money for the most sexually explicit of his games. If you want to hear more about this and want a good laugh as well, then please check out Robert's talk. You can find it, along with all of this year's Microtalks, on the GDC Vault if you Google GDC Microtalks 2016. Another good game about intimacy, one of the last two that I want to recommend to you, is Emily is Away by Kyle Seeley. It was released for free late last year. It's a really affecting game about a relationship that unfolds over 5 years, starting in late high school and lasting all throughout college. The entirety of the game is presented through a chat client on a computer desktop that has this very early 2000s feel. That and all of the other little details in the game, the icons, the bands that they talk about, give it a very strong feel of a particular time in recent history. The writing in the game is great, and the way that it shows how difficult it can be to discuss our feelings with someone that we care about is really very moving. And to kind of bring us full circle, all the way back to Heather Kelly's Lapis for this section of the talk, this game, La Petite Mort, made by Lovable Hat Cult, which is a company founded by Andrea Hasselager and Patrick Jarnfeldt of the Copenhagen Game Collective again, came out just last Friday. This is a mindful, meditative, sensuous mobile game. It's out now for Android, but it's been banned from the Apple Store. And it's about the way that pixels can respond to the slightest touch of your fingers. The Android phone owners among you will have to download this game and show it to the iPhone users so that you guys can decide among yourselves whether or not Apple were right to ban this game. It's pretty difficult to make games about love, sex, and romance that work well. As is the case with most kinds of storytelling games, I think that the biggest challenge is in hitting exactly the right tone. Just as it's all too easy to make a game that's meant to be dramatic, but turns out to be just kind of cliched, or to try and make a game that's meant to be funny, but just isn't, the jokes fall flat. So it's very easy to make a game about love that's too sentimental or too cheesy. And it's even easier to make a game about sex, which instead of being sensual or sexy, is just kind of objectifying or sexist. I think as we hone our craft as game designers, it's up to us to try and polish our skills so that the tone of our game lands well with other people. And of course, there's only one way to do this. And as Jerry was reminding us this morning, that's by getting on and trying to make games about love, romance, and sex. And recently, some game designers have been getting together to do just that. In early 2014, I heard about an event called the Lust Summit, a one-day conference immediately followed by a 2-day game jam about love, romance, and sex in games, organized by Andrea and Patrick of the Copenhagen Game Collective, whose game I just mentioned. Lust is a Danish word that means both lust and light. The first year of the summit took place on a little boat in the harbor in Copenhagen, and the second year took place in a small theater and then on an island, which you can see right here, in Helsinki in Finland. And this summer, Lust will hold its third year of events in Hamar in Norway. Each of the summits has been truly amazing and has brought together many different kinds of people with many perspectives on play and games. I think having a day of talks and conversation followed by a 2-day game jam is a really great way to draw out fresh ideas about game design, as well as for creating community. And loads of amazing stuff has come out of the Lust Summit. It's attractive, lots of great speakers, and I quickly want to tell you about some of the interesting things that those speakers have said over the last 2 years of Lust. Dr. Hannah Verman is a professor at the School of Design of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and she gave a mind-expanding talk at the second Lust Summit about the huge number, actually, of games about love, sex, and romance, where the love, sex, and romance is indeed a driving force and core mechanic. She uncovered a vast number of games that I had never heard of, games that I haven't mentioned today, from dating sims and virtual partners in varying degrees of questionable taste, to the huge genre of web kissing games where you have to kiss someone without getting caught. Have you guys heard of these games? It's an enormous genre, dozens, maybe hundreds of games, very popular with teenage girls. Very interesting genre. And then, of course, there are very many different kinds of pornographic games in 2D, 3D, and now increasingly in virtual reality, as well as sex education games and the kind of sex art games that I've just been talking about. Hannah pointed out that almost no academic research is being done into this huge and almost invisible category of games. So it seems like a PhD project in waiting for one of you guys. At the first Lust Summit, Lau Korsgaard of the Copenhagen Game Collective, also a founding member of Napnock Games, alongside his fellow CGC member Diana Dimovska, gave a great talk about Napnock's Spin the Bottle, Bumpy's Party. I'm sure many of you guys have seen this Wii U game. It kind of followed on from Darkroom Sex Game. Lau talked about how Napnock was really interested to reinvent the Slumber Party game, using the Wiimote to create this multiplayer experience that could be seen as an innocent and sweet physical game, but that could also have the same design goals of awkward humor in pursuit of intimacy that Darkroom Sex Game had. The tradition of serious and artistic live-action role-playing known as Nordic LARP has made an appearance at both Lust Summits so far. Jaakko Stenros, who's a game researcher, player, and writer, spoke about the many different techniques that Nordic LARPers use to bring emotional and physical intimacy to their games. Some players might use a system where touching hands or maybe massaging arms stands in for sexual activity. Some players in some games might simply go somewhere else, behind a curtain perhaps, where the other players can't see them, and make sex noises. Some players use creative techniques like singing, dancing, or even body painting to symbolize physical intimacy. Jaakko made the excellent point that a shared experience of awkwardness, again, is the key to intimacy. It made me think about Lau's talk about Bumpy's Party. Anna Westerling, who's a producer and project leader in the culture sector here in Scandinavia, and who is also involved in Nordic LARP, gave a great talk about the ways that LARPing, teenage love, and magic spells were brought together in the groundbreaking College of Wizardry LARP that she helped stage over 2 days at a castle in Poland. The wizarding teachers in this LARP taught the students a number of spells, including a love spell called Amorosa. The teachers emphasized to their students that it was strictly forbidden to cast Amorosa on yourself when you were dancing with someone at the high school dance that evening, which Anna told us, of course, was code for you should definitely try to do this at the dance this evening. I think as role-playing becomes more and more important in the design of modern narrative games, not just LARPs, but digital games, I think we're going to see more role-playing in. I think that this subject matter of how we can design game mechanics that support the role-playing of powerful emotional moments is going to become increasingly essential. Dr. Esther McCallum-Stewart, who's an expert in online gaming communities and gender and sexuality in video games, gave an amazing talk about the way that love is a kind of holy grail in games. It drives engagement with the characters, it does financially useful things around resource acquisition, and it creates downtime to kind of spread out the game's core gameplay content. However, she pointed out that the experiences of love in games are typically oriented to the women characters, while the men characters in games are usually very limited in the ways that they can express love because of the narratives about masculinity that we inherit from our culture. My friend, the game designer and critic Matty Bryce, has addressed similar subject matter in an article that you guys can find online about the way that men are sexualized, or rather, the way that men are usually not sexualized in games. Sassybot Studio in the Netherlands recently released a touching art house game on Steam called Fragments of Him, which is a great game about love and loss. Their narrative designer, Mata Haggis, gave a great talk at Lust about story and emotion. The narrative design techniques that Mata described about looking at the motivations of the characters in a game's story and trying to align those with play mechanics, and about taking a scene or a situation in gameplay and asking what events led up to this moment, are really powerful tools, I think, for the design of all kinds of storytelling games, no matter what their subject. Joy Richardson, who has a background in engineering psychology at the University of Southampton, talked about families in games. This is a subject that you might not think about when you think about love, romance, and sex in games, but of course it's closely related. That's where we come from. She pointed out that beyond Mario and Luigi being brothers, there's very little representation of family in games. When family members are present, they're usually only in the background of the game. They sometimes appear right at the beginning of the game and then disappear from the game's story, perhaps forever. However, she mentioned that games like Fallout 2 and the Fable series have really led the way in allowing gay couples and gay marriage. And it seems like there's a great opening here for creative game designers to explore the very many different experiences of family that each of us have. And finally, at the first Lust Summit, Gotland Games' very own Ernest Adams gave a fascinating and wide-ranging talk about the mechanics of romance and love, about how games can quantify the unquantifiable, systematizing the chaos of the world in doing so, about how heroic women, like the first woman in space, who you can see here, could potentially inspire great game design ideas, and about how you never ever see pregnant women or nursing mothers in games. It was great. You should get Ernest to do his talk for you guys sometime. As I said earlier, after the first day of the Lust Summit, with all of these great conference talks, then the two-day game jam would begin. The jam's a big part of the magic of Lust, perhaps because everyone's heads are now full of new ideas and new perspectives, and everyone is ready to unleash their creativity in new ways. Many different kinds of creative people, not just game developers, come to the summit. And getting folks from outside of games to bring in their ideas always seems to lead to very lively and fresh new stuff. The Lust Summit also offers scholarships, giving away free places at the summit to make sure that lots of different people from all kinds of backgrounds get the chance to attend. You can get a sense of the pace and the feel of the summit from this video, which was shot at last year's summit in Finland. You can see me pop up in my bright yellow sweatshirt a couple of times. Too many amazing games came out of the Lust Summit for me to tell you about now. There were digital games, board games and card games, and physical games like this one, which approached love, romance and sex from many, many different angles. You can find some of them online. Some of the games have found life beyond the summit, with their creators continuing to work on them further. But perhaps the most important thing about the Lust Summit games is that in making them, we, all of us, began to think in new ways about making games, about what games could have as their subject matter, and about the ways that games could facilitate new types of relationships between people. Try and pause this.
Slat!
Oh no, I can't. Applications to take part in this summer's Lust Summit are now closed, but if this sounds interesting to you, then I'd encourage you to maybe follow the various organizers on Twitter and listen out for an announcement in early 2017 for next year's Lust Summit, and I'll see you guys there. So why should we make games about love, romance, sex, and all the very many kinds of intimacy that exist? Well, like I said earlier, the fundamental currencies that we game designers use to get and hold the attention of our audience are ideas and emotions. Arguably, nowhere is denser with ideas and emotions that are difficult to express, but that are readily recognized by most adults, and that are ready to be expressed through game mechanics and game stories than our private lives. If we learn to talk about sex using the mechanical and narrative affordances of games, we might become more understanding of each other in the process. We might become also more understanding of ourselves. Intimacy and empathy are in short enough supply in this world. I'm sure you'll agree. What if games could bring a little more intimacy and empathy into our lives? And this subject matter has the potential to bring us commercial success as well as artistic success. It's a little-known fact that one of the major inspirations for the Uncharted series were the screwball comedies of the 1930s and 40s. Amy Hennig's love of the witty banter and the romantic tension between actors like Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant set the template for the backchat between Nathan Drake and Elena Fisher. Whoever cracks the nut of the romantic comedy video game with the vast potential audience that must surely exist for this genre will probably become a very successful and wealthy person. USC Games alumni Genova Chen, Kelly Santiago, and all of their teammates at that game company made a strange experimental game that focuses on the intimacy between two strangers traveling together across a beautiful but inhospitable landscape. And their explorative game design led to, of course, the runaway success of their 2012 Game of the Year, Journey. But there are pitfalls to watch out for when we're making a game that focuses on creating empathy, though. The game designer Anna Anthropy made a game called Dysphoria about the experiences of a trans woman navigating the world. Dysphoria was widely heralded as promoting empathy for the experiences of trans people. But Anna is critical of the idea of empathy games. She warns us against substituting a passing feeling of empathy for a character in a game with the long-term commitment to changing our attitudes and actions in order to make life better for others. Anna told the author of this Motherboard article, Why Video Games Can't Teach You Empathy, if you've played a 10-minute game about being a trans woman, don't pat yourself on the back for feeling like you understand a marginalized experience. Anna went on to make an art installation game called Empathy Game, with her typical wit, where you literally had to walk a mile in a pair of her old, uncomfortable shoes to underline the point that it is hard to truly inhabit and understand the experience of another. In this interesting article called Against Empathy on the Boston Review, the Yale University professor of psychology and cognitive science, Paul Bloom, argues that having our empathy overactivated can lead to a thing called empathic distress. This is a reactive state of hyperarousal and overstimulation that can leave us emotionally exhausted and unable to help others as a result. He argues that rather than empathy, we should strive towards the related but differing goal of compassion, where, as recommended by Buddhist texts down the centuries, we receive the emotions of others without strongly negative attachment, but instead with concern for their well-being and with love. Just some food for thought. Taboos and social standards around love, romance, and sex have changed radically in the past half a century. The counterculture movement of the 60s, the advent of the contraceptive pill in the 70s, and the gay rights revolution of the 80s and beyond all helped to create an incrementally more just and equal world for people from all across the incredible multidimensional space that is human sexuality and gender identity. And today, we're living through another revolution as we collectively come to a better understanding of the lives of trans people and other people of marginalized gender identity or sexual orientation. The struggle goes on to enshrine everyone's human rights in law and in our cultural and civic lives. And this is work that's far from over. You probably know about the current controversies about bathrooms in the United States. But the fact that we're having positive conversations about how to make things better for everyone is a sign of progress, I hope. Lots of game designers are interested in love and sex in video games right now. At this year's GGC in San Francisco, the IGDA Romance and Sexuality Special Interest Group organized a panel addressing 9 different questions that they wanted to see answered. By looking at these subjects, we have the potential to take incredible strides towards new frontiers for game design. This is our opportunity as game designers, and maybe, as creators of culture, it's also our responsibility. I've put quite a positive spin on the subjects that I've touched on today, drawing our attention to the progress that's been made as regards our taboos around romantic self-expression, identity, and orientation. But of course, things are still far from perfect in this world, and we have some very serious problems to address. There is lots of structural injustice in most every society related to the ways that people love. Some people's experience of things like asexuality, or having a non-binary gender identity, or of non-monogamy, are still so far from the mainstream that we barely begin to know how to talk about them. But to take one very mainstream example of one of the very many subjects that we could address in a positive way in our games if we chose to. In her book, Why We Should All Be Feminists, the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says, "We do a great disservice to boys in how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity is a hard, small cage, and we put boys inside this cage. And then we do a much greater disservice to girls because we teach them to cater to the resulting fragile egos of boys. We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller." She goes on to say that we have the opportunity to change situations like this. She says, "Culture does not make people. People make culture." Games are culture, and by pushing ourselves into our private lives, outside of our comfort zones, and beyond the taboos that we face when we're making games, we can make games that entertain while they're affecting people positively in countless new ways. As Adichie says, "I would like today to ask that we begin to dream about and plan for a different world, a fairer world, a world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves." This is what games, from the ancient Olympics to the present day, have always helped bring about in the world. Let's find new ways to do it with the games that we make, starting today, right here, right now. I want to dedicate this talk to my fellow speakers at the Gotland Game Conference who have been encouraging us to make more original, more personal games. I want to dedicate it to everyone in the Lust Summit community from whom I've learned so much. And I want to dedicate it to every game designer who's working in this area. Thank you to all of you for everything, and thank you to you guys for your time today. Thanks. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. I don't know